Welcome to this explainer. It's incredibly easy to think of the justice system as this perfectly calibrated machine, right? But what happens when the gears completely seize up? Today, we're unpacking the dense 5-year Democracy Master Report to objectively understand how complex institutional systems can literally trap an individual. We are going to dive into the intersection of pandemic-era judicial compression, automated database errors, and deep institutional opacity right in King County, Washington. To really grasp the sheer scale of this report right off the bat, we're going to anchor our analysis in a pretty staggering metric: 8 interconnected legal cases involving a single individual. We're not talking about 8 different people having one bad day. We are looking at one person processed through the system 8 separate times, and that reveals structural patterns that a single case study simply could never expose. And these cases span 5 grueling years. 5 years navigating the Seattle Municipal and King County Superior Courts, caught in an absolute loop of administrative churn. 5 years is a massive window of time to be entangled in legal limbo, but it allows us to see exactly how short-term institutional crises, like the pandemic or regional health anxieties, can mutate into long-term procedural breakdowns. So what does this actually result in? Over 365 estimated days of detention, often without formal charges ever even being filed. Just let that sink in for a second. That is more than a full calendar year of physical freedom lost. And as the report highlights, this wasn't necessarily the result of convictions. It was the result of what the analysts call administrative momentum, where the system just continues to process, detain, and hold, even when the legal foundation for doing so has completely collapsed. Here's how this master report unravels the whole system, and here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 5 areas. First, the 8 cases that ground the report. Second, what happens when due process fails. Third, the competency bypass pipeline. Fourth, mapping institutional gridlock. And finally, the blueprint for structural reform. Let's get right into it. Starting with Section 1, 8 cases, 1 system, grounding the master report. Let's look at the actual source documentation that grounds this entire systemic analysis so we can impartially explore the mechanics of the system rather than the underlying politics. What we are looking at here is the official Procedural Justice and Systems Failure Master Report compiled in May 2026. Think of it as a forensic audit of due process. It meticulously and neutrally tracks these breakdowns, and it implicates over 6 different constitutional amendments across these 8 cases, everything from 4th Amendment unlawful seizure to 8th Amendment conditions of confinement. By anchoring all this dense legal data in raw case files like this one, the report maps out profound structural vulnerabilities without taking sides on any underlying political disputes. For example, the report touches on everything from local protests at the governor's mansion to officers seeking anonymity regarding the January 6 rallies. But it doesn't weigh in on the politics. Instead, it points out a really clear systemic asymmetry where institutions and state actors can protect their own privacy and delay proceedings while the individual is left hyper-visible and just trapped in the gears of the system. Moving on to Section 2, when due process fails, procedural collapse in action. Here, we're zooming in on the human element. How does a person end up detained without a legal basis? Well, the report documents several pathways, and they all share a common theme: technology and administrative routine wildly outpacing human oversight. This timeline right here brilliantly illustrates the absolute absurdity of that administrative momentum we talked about. Look at this case, 658931. An individual was arrested and arraigned, only to have the case dismissed 24 hours later because the prosecution literally never filed a formal complaint. The police executed an arrest, the jail booked the individual, the court held an arraignment, the gears turned perfectly. Except the actual legal charge was missing. The system functioned flawlessly to detain a person, but failed entirely to justify it. Or take a look at another really stark example, case 660121. An automated database sync failure flagged an expired protective order as active. The result? An immediate, unwarranted tactical arrest with absolutely zero human verification. The individual was literally just trying to get his mail, with text message permission from the homeowner right in his hand. But because a municipal and county database failed to sync properly, multiple police vehicles surrounded him. The computer said arrest, and the human officers executed it without double-checking the facts. It's a pretty terrifying look at what happens when we remove the human in the loop. Which brings us to Section 3, the competency bypass pipeline, the medicalization of legal process. So how does the system maintain control without evidence?
Let's explore the invisible machinery of the system, and frankly, one of the most controversial findings in the entire report. The report identifies a recurring systemic mechanism called the competency bypass. Basically, this is the weaponization of psychiatric proceedings as a procedural substitute to avoid evidentiary review. When the individual tried to present evidence of severe data hacks or technological harassment, rather than actually investigating the digital forensics, the system just labeled the claims as delusional. And by invoking a competency evaluation, the court legally pauses the trial. This allows the system to hold a person indefinitely in a medical or outpatient setting without ever having to prove the original criminal charges in front of a jury. We can see the truly devastating impact of this bypass in case 658959. Dismissed charges instantly morphed into an undocumented 22-day medical hold and forced medication without any informed consent. The exact moment the judge dismissed the criminal charges, the individual was quietly transferred to a medical center without a written court order. There, they were subjected to physical restraints, injected with antipsychotics like haloperidol against their will, and even subjected to a spinal tap based on speculative, false infectious disease claims. The legal process ended, but the deprivation of liberty simply changed uniforms, from police to medical staff.
Now, before we analyze the system as a whole, we need to translate a quick piece of network jargon, betweenness centrality. Simply put, it's a metric identifying a system's biggest structural bottleneck, or bridge. Because if you want to fix a broken system, you don't just randomly change things, right? You find the node with the highest betweenness centrality because everything flows through it.
So let's apply that in Section 4. Mapping Institutional Gridlock, System-Wide Network Analysis. The report maps these individual human experiences onto a sprawling 57-node network analysis, literally charting every agency, failure mode, and legal case to see mathematically where the system was breaking down.
According to the analysis, the Seattle Police Department holds the highest betweenness centrality. That means it functions as the single most critical choke point bridging case intake to the courts. Just look at the massive drop-off in that score. The SPD is at 0.0040, and the next highest is the jail at 0.0007. This mathematically proves that law enforcement intake is the primary structural bridge. If there is a breakdown in evidence verification at the police level, it acts as a massive multiplier, cascading bad data down to the prosecutors, the jails, and eventually the courts. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. Compare the connectivity of the individual cases to the agencies. In network mapping, out degree means pointing outward or taking action. The data shows the institutions, the courts, the hospitals, the police, have almost zero out degree when it comes to initiating fixes. They are passive recipients of friction. It's the individual cases crashing into the system that highlight the flaws and demand the reforms. The system simply doesn't fix itself. It has to be forced. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Blueprint for Structural Reform, Actionable Systemic Fixes. The good news is, the report doesn't just point fingers. It offers a highly specific 31-point list of proposed reforms based entirely on the mathematical and procedural vulnerabilities we've just uncovered. And the crucial takeaway is that this massive list of 31 reforms can be grouped into these 3 high-level actionable categories to prevent administrative churn, implement digital tracking, establish competency safeguards, and mandate medical oversight. By attacking the bottlenecks we identified earlier, lawmakers and institutional leaders can actually reintroduce constitutional safeguards back into the machine. These specific policies are absolute game changers. They ensure that forced medical transfers require a strict judicial signature, and that automated protective order flags cannot trigger an arrest without a human actually verifying the data. It also mandates an automatic release if a prosecutor doesn't file a complaint within a strict window, which completely eliminates that 24-hour unconstitutional detention we discussed earlier. And crucially, it demands independent review boards for competency evaluations, ensuring that psychiatry cannot be used as a backdoor to avoid a fair trial. So, we leave you with this final thought. If an automated database flags an error, who holds the human accountable for the arrest? When automated momentum and bureaucratic machinery outpace constitutional safeguards, who is ultimately responsible for the human cost? The Democracy Master Report shows us pretty clearly that when the system is allowed to operate on autopilot, the individual pays the price. But by enforcing human verification, demanding judicial transparency, and refusing to let administrative ease replace actual justice, we can start to rebuild the safeguards that protect us all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and we will see you next time.